first of all, it's great to have both of you here. Now, our conversation today is going to be turning waste into resources. I just mentioned in my introduction, waste is a huge problem in Africa, and it's great to see that, Awaku, you guys are really at the forefront of making change happen in Africa. So maybe you could give us a little bit of an insight into how is Macintosh actually doing this in practice? What are you doing to turn waste into resources?
Right. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be part of the forum this year. And as you said, waste is a big problem, and critically, it's something that we need to address. And for us at Macintosh Africa, we have a sustainable model that we run that has the focus on circular economy strategies, because globally, if you take food waste, for instance, which we hardly talk about, but of which food waste is a bigger problem even than plastic waste, over 1/3 of the food that is produced is wasted, while over 800 million people around the world cannot get food to eat. So it's ironic that people cannot get food to eat, but there's food that is wasting around the world. And this is a challenge. This should be a concern to us, because people who are hungry are people who are angry. And if we want the world to be a safer place, we need to actually find solutions to some of these problems. So the work of Macintosh Africa focuses on advocacy. We do a lot of advocacy on circular economy and climate change here in Ghana and Africa and globally. Our work also focuses on influencing policy. We have particularly contributed to Ghana's national plastic waste management policy that was launched by the President of Ghana in 2019 and passed into law in 2020. Our work also focuses on plastic waste innovations, where we've innovated footwear from plastic waste, fashion products from plastic waste. We have partners we are working with that are turning plastic waste into pavement blocks, and then also wood-like beams that are going to be used for construction. Our work also focuses on waste segregation strategies, as we realize that even though plastic waste is available in the environment, it is not accessible to recycling facilities for them to use to turn them into raw materials for production. So we create a sustainable waste segregation programs around the city to allow people to separate their waste and prevent it from ending up in landfill sites. Our work also focuses on academic and institutional research. So we've partnered with the University of Michigan in the US, University of Brighton in the UK, and other universities to make sure that whilst we are trying to create a solution, we are also provoking other young people along the journey to come along, because no single organization can solve all the problems. So this is a bit about the work we do at Macintosh Africa.
Thank you, Awaku, for that. You actually raised an important point on, that you also an advocate for spreading circular economy practices in Africa. I will get back to you on a question about that in a moment, because I'd be interested to hear the regional discrepancies across Africa in terms of the adoption of these practices. But let us get to Lara van Trooten. I introduced her already, but I'll do that again. Lara is the CEO of the Waste Transformers Company, and it's great to have you here, Lara. Can you hear and see us okay?
I certainly can. I hope that you can hear and see me as well. So firstly, a very sincere thank you for the invite. And let me start by perhaps giving a brief introduction into the Waste Transformers and what we do. The point was already made around food waste, and we're very much focused on tackling that food waste issue. And what we do is we process organic waste on site, which makes it a little different from many of the typical approaches that we see, where typically what waste management companies do is they function, as it were, as the kind of Uber of waste. They're all about logistics and transporting waste from left to right. We have a very different approach. So we process organic waste at the spot where that waste is produced. We have developed a small-scale anaerobic digester. It's made of 20-foot shipping containers, and we adjust the number of shipping containers based on the amount of waste that there is. It's a plug-and-play process, so we're pretty much up and running in 1 day. The input is all organic waste, which is fed into the installation, and then we turn that organic waste on site into electricity and into residual heat, and we use that electricity to give back to the organization that created the waste to begin with. And the residual heat we can either use for hot water purposes, for refrigeration purposes, or otherwise for air conditioning, depending on what is needed. And then all of the nutrients that are left inside that waste, we also recover all of those nutrients. We stabilize a fertilizer, and that fertilizer can then be used. It's got very high NPK values, so that can be used in order to grow fresh food. And in that way, we create small-scale circular economies on site with something that would otherwise be wasted. And we try and do all of that with a healthy business case. We have currently operations in South Africa. We're active in Sierra Leone, and we've also just started in Ghana and in Uganda.
Very, very interesting and a very, very needed project. I was looking at you up on social media as I was preparing for this conference, and I really love what you do. Maybe just a little follow-up question, Lara. In terms of, you said you're present in South Africa. Are you planning to expand some of these operations? And maybe you can tell us what are some of those obstacles in bringing about this type of approach in Africa? Because we heard earlier, it was I think Ali Zerouali who said that electricity is the most expensive in Africa. So there's clearly a need to supply Africans with a consistent energy, electricity supply. So maybe you could share a little bit more about what the regional differences and where you're planning to expand to.
Yeah, so as I said, we're active in South Africa, but we're also very active in Sierra Leone. And perhaps that's an interesting project to start to talk about a little bit. So in Sierra Leone, we have an installation which is placed next to a local hospital, and the neighborhood and the local restaurants provide their food waste, which is fed into the shipping container, and the electricity from the shipping container powers, or co-powers, I should say, the hospital, and the fertilizer that we recover is used to create to grow new food, essentially. And whilst one installation is interesting, and we really are about thinking big by going small, and then repeating that at several locations in and around Freetown. So our ambition there is to create a network of 40 small-scale installations in and around Freetown that would be connected, and that would provide, as it were, an alternative blueprint for a different kind of infrastructure, a decentralized infrastructure that could service the megacities of Africa in a completely different way. I mean, typically when we think about converting waste into energy, and hopefully also with resource recovery in the form of nutrients, very often we think about these huge, large-scale, centralized installations. The problem there is that the capital expenditure associated with that is extremely high. And you're looking at investments of above 100 million. And on top of that, the risk factor is also extremely high, because if something goes wrong in just one part of that process, then that whole big installation has to shut down. The charm of a decentralized approach is that you recognize that very often, the physical infrastructure isn't in place, so you don't always have the roads and the frameworks needed in order to transport this waste from A to B. With a decentralized approach, you can really look at local communities and what local communities need, and provide a solution to their energy needs. Also tackle a very keen sanitation issue, and at the same time provide an alternative for the production of fresh food. So with this network in Sierra Leone, it's a project of 26 million in total that we're currently working with a private equity partner in order to create it. And once we get that right, the ambition is, as I say, to repeat that at different places where we have operations, which will be in Ghana, will be in Uganda, and will be in Southern Africa.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lara, for that insight. I would like to hear from you, Awaka. You mentioned earlier that you're an advocate for, spreading this whole concept of circular economy across Africa. Maybe you can share your perspectives of where you have seen, or whether you are seeing a discrepancy in between the different countries of Africa. Is there certain countries that are more progressive when it comes to adopting these practices, and what needs to change?
Okay, great. So it's important to note that here in Africa, we have a lot of challenges, and even though we are very rich when it comes to resources, we are one of the continents that is not very well developed, unfortunately, and we've not been able to, over the years, develop to the point where the whole agenda of circular economy and sustainability is something that looks appealing to our leaders. Because the point is that because over the years we have not taken advantage of the innovations and the technologies that have already been created. Because I always say that in Africa, even if we decide not to create any new innovation, there's so much innovation available for us to use to tackle the problems, the biggest problems we have. But we are not even making most of these innovations. And when it comes to implementation of some of these sustainability projects, the challenge has been that most of the African countries don't have policies to back these type of journeys. And even for Ghana, it was up to 2019 when we now had a plastic waste management policy. We didn't used to have that before. And what the policy seeks to change is to create an intentional approach to sustainable ways of handling waste, create an intentional approach towards investment in innovations that lead to recycling that can turn waste into valuable resource, create an intentional approach where the key players in the sector can always come together to engage and partner to move forward. So the bigger problem is that most African countries are still struggling to develop the basic infrastructure their people need to actually pursue their dreams. So for most governments, they are not really focusing on sustainability. They don't really even understand the whole concept because they are grappling with bigger problems that they've not been able to find headway. So it's a big challenge pushing these kind of projects within Africa. Lara will admit to you. But then we are changing the way our people and our leaders are seeing issues of sustainability and circular economy, and we are working to convince them that this is the way for us to go as we try to develop, as we try to make impact. We need to understand that if we don't start addressing these issues now, and Africa is one of the continents that suffers the most from the impact of climate change, but yet we are not the highest contributors when it comes to carbon footprint. So there's a need for us to actually act now, and there's a need for our leaders to actually start looking at it. So we are still hoping that most African leaders can, but currently the interest in the area is very low from our leaders.
Lara, please add your words, and then we can wrap up the session because we're kind of running over otherwise.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and I do think that there's numerous barriers, as my colleague has just mentioned, but let's also not forget that there's enormous opportunity in Africa. And on the one hand, there's an enormous amount of entrepreneurship. And that entrepreneurship is incredibly creative. So people are coming up with creative new solutions constantly and tackling that and not actually waiting for government. They're figuring out things on their own and finding new ways and new business models in which they can take waste and turn it into new products and to new resources. The other thing is that the fact that there isn't this highly developed infrastructure also offers an enormous opportunity for the African continent, because they don't necessarily have to make many of the infrastructural mistakes that have been made in Europe. And we really have the opportunity here to kind of leapfrog many of the issues and learn from the mistakes elsewhere in order to create a different kind of infrastructure, which is smarter, greener, cleaner, and brighter.
Yes, Lara, just before very briefly, Lara, I just have one question. Awaku talked about that this is not appealing to leaders. And where do you see Africa and Europe being able to collaborate on doing what you just mentioned and on thinking big and going small and really thinking differently about this? Very briefly, we only have 30 seconds.
I think, one of the areas is really where, to learn from many of the mistakes that have been made in Europe and to approach this kind of in a greenfields way, if you like, and to ensure that the new infrastructure that we are building is better than what has been achieved in other places, and where we really are able to harness kind of the renewable sector in a way that improves sanitation, creates jobs, produces industrialization, but also looks at energy based on productive use, and rather than just energy as a form of consumption. And I think that Europe has a strong role to play also in supporting the creation of that infrastructure.
Absolutely. Thank you both, Lara and Awaku.